Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Today we are going to discuss about the ecological and the sacred dimension of culturally responsive built environments. Before talking about any dimension, I would like to give you a brief background about the ecological aspects of our environments and precisely more to the built environments. I think the whole geography is varied with different climates, and they're all located in different geographical positions. Some countries are in tropical, some are in the temperate, some are in the Arctic. And if you look at it, the very fundamental aspect is we have divided into 8 biomes, which actually follows upon the climate. So what is a biome? A biome is a large and distinctive complex of plant communities created and maintained by the climate. So here you can see here, like in India, we have about the tropical rainforest, and whereas in parts of Europe, we have the temperate and deciduous forest. But if you go a little above, you have the taiga, and little colder above, we have the tundra and the ice. Now, if you want to understand about the biomes, how they are established by the altitude, and what kind of plant communities, like you have in these kind of equatorial, you have the tropical rainforests, like even in countries like India, we see plants like palm trees, we see like mangoes, different plant species are actually originated and they are grown over here. But whereas if you go into the kind of Chiga range, where you see a lot of tall pine trees or even deciduous trees, and in temperate we also find the temperate deciduous forest, and whereas in tundra it's a kind of polar and a little bit of kind of grasslands. So this is how the whole geography and the plant communities are varied by its climatic aspects and as well as its geological aspects. And that is what, taking this kind of base, Professor H.D. Chaya actually in the journal of Spandrel with the theme referred in the sacred, so he actually classifies on how we can understand the holistic dimensions of culture and metaculture places of pilgrim places. And he classifies there's global plus local, which is about glocal, and then he takes into these global ecocultures. In fact, he takes the whole from both the hemispheres of the earth, and ecoculture zone of the temperate zone between about 15 degrees to 45 degrees altitude, and as well as the ecoculture of the cold zone, which is about 45 to 70, and ecoculture of the equatorial zone. Like you can see from these photographs, like in the kind of temperate climates, how the landscape and how the types of species of trees and what kind of climates do exist. And similarly in a kind of Florence, where the whole setting of Mediterranean climates, how it works. And similarly in the Spain and in the similar Mediterranean countries. But here the most important thing is, because our climate tells you how to behave and what routines you can follow. For instance, in the tropical climates, at least in my childhood, we all slept on the terraces. We spend most of our time in the open spaces, whereas in the polar climates, it is very different. The polar landscape changes by its different seasons, the extreme seasons. Like, for instance, you can see in Lulio, in subarctic climates, where the whole sea gets frozen. This is a frozen sea, and it becomes a road in the winter. And where the whole river becomes a kind of sledge pathways. Whereas, even not only that, if you travel around different countries and different regions, this is my personal observation too. Even the sky colors, the nature of sky, and the appearance of the sky is also very different. In fact, I remember when I was living in Sweden, the sky sometimes appears very closer to me, and the kind of colors which we get, like here you can see in some parts of Scandinavia, most of the time we get a very bright and very colorful skies, and in fact, even in the night, we do get the northern lights, and how people adapt to it. In fact, for them, like almost 8 months of the time, the people who are basically farmers, they can't do agriculture because everything is covered with snow. So obviously, their whole livelihood patterns are dictated by the weather conditions. And similarly, how people started welcoming winter. Earlier, they were trying to be a protective from the winter, but now they are opening the ideas of how we can welcome the winter, how we can take part in as a you are participating in winter so that you can encourage yourself and you can develop your social well-being. And so what they do is, here you can see this particular image is in the heart of Luleå, near the high street, where they actually recycle the snow, and they do incorporate certain arts, in the form of children playing sledges or children activities, so that everyone can come and participate even in the winter time. And similarly, the kind of naturally available resources, this is in Levi in Finland, where people have these wooden cottages. So in fact, based on their natural resources, based on the climatic conditions, people adapt to different ways of living. In fact, even the dog sledges, where the whole river becomes a pathway. So sometimes the barrier in the summer becomes a pathway in the winter. Now, we got an idea about what is a kind of biomes and how they are distributed, sometimes on an unequal basis, and how different geographies have different climates and how different societies adapt to those climates in different ways. Like if you go to the Punjab area, where they wear the kind of golden color dresses or very bright colors in order to be in contrast with the kind of landscape which they are, and they also have the dancing cultures, the bhangra, which are more matching with the kind of landscape setting which they are. And similarly, in the Scandinavian cultures, they all have this kind of midsummer day where they are welcoming certain, the change of weather conditions, and they participate in some kind of religious activities and the social activities as well. And these kind of things do exist in almost all the cultures. You take from Chinese to Indian or American or Canadian or Italian, anyone. But before that, we also have, because in our previous lecture, we did spoke about our geological dimension of built environments, especially with the cave dwellings of Pitalkhora in Aurangabad district, and how a geology and how the technical aspects of it is very essential to understand the nature of the built environment. But whereas now in today's lecture, we'll be talking on the kind of how the ecosystems and how the nature and culture meets together, and to create a sense of their representation, and the kind of create a cultural, irresponsive built environment. So here, before that, one need to understand what is an ecosystem and its services. An ecosystem is often referred to kind of a dynamic complex of plant, animal, and even the microorganism communities and the non-living environment interacting as a functional unit. So this is most important, because all these organisms, it could be a plant series, it could be a microorganism, it could be a built, unbuilt, so everything, how they are actually working in a kind of functional unit. And what is an ecosystem services? It is basically the benefits people obtain from the ecosystems. It could be a provisional services such as food, water, timber, fiber, and a regulating services that affect the climate, floods, disease, waste, and water quality, and also the cultural services that provide recreational, aesthetic, spiritual benefits, and supporting services such as soil formation, photosynthesis, and nutrient service. Like how it is offering many benefits. So if you look into the next picture, you see here in especially this is from the sacred sites document, where natural sites guidelines for protected area managers. You can see that how they classified the ecosystem services. So mainly they classified into kind of supporting, it could be, and provisioning. These are the basic needs, and how it also controls the regulating aspect of it, and the cultural. In fact, how these provisioning services and the regulating services and the cultural and the supporting, if you look at it, how a particular natural reeds in somewhere near Mauritius or anywhere, how actually they protect certain habitats in terms of protecting them from the floods or any other climate change impacts. So in that way, if you look at it, what they did was they kind to make a small, by width it's weak, medium, and strong. I look at the arrows here, so this is a little bit of a strong, and then this is a potential of mediation by socioeconomic factors, so how it is low, medium, high, and how these ecosystem services, how these constitutes to the well-being of the human habitats. On a security purpose, yes, it provides the personal safety, secure resource access, and security from disasters. Sometimes these ecosystems do provide a kind of barrier to protect you from the disasters. And today we are talking about climate change. Obviously, it is all about we are the actors who are involving in the whole process of change, and in return what we are getting. Basic material for good life, adequate livelihood, sufficient nutritious food, shelter, and access to the goods, and health, as well as good social relationships and freedom of choice. So I hope you got the point now. And then how the settings of these ecosystems and how these natural elements, how I mean, with these processes, these kind of landscape, which actually establishes a key link between the tangible and the intangible of diverse, pluralistic, and multifaceted cultural settings. In the before lectures also, we talked about how a hilly regions of Uttarakhand and the landscape of Uttarakhand hills, how it gives certain meanings to those communities who are living on the hilly areas. And similarly, in the architect circles, how that particular landscape setting is giving meanings. And Amita Sinha, this is one of the important article which this lecture has mostly developed on, especially with her study on Govardhan. She was a professor in University of Illinois, in the urban Champaign, Illinois, and Illinois Institute of Technology. And here she talks about these landscapes are often looked as mnemonic devices containing not just clues to material remains of the past, but encompassing relationships between human cultures and nature. So basically, it is integrating the human and the nature. They are a part of cultural memory, how we interact with it, and how it becomes a memory within our, and how it is transferred and how it is stored. This is stored and transferred from one generation to another generation in the form of myths. It could be formulated in a kind of oral traditions and enacted in a ritual performing arts. That is how she just summarized all this. I'll give you some a little bit of examples from other parts of the world, where this was an images from Lefkara in Cyprus, where we were involved in some project a decade before, and you can see that because of the local being a Greek civilization and how they still maintained all, even the pathways, everything in the same pattern, and how the pottery aspects of it, and how they are still, even today they are maintaining all these aspects. And not only that, you look at the way they are maintaining the courtyards of the dwelling, and the balcony colors, which are mainly painted with the indigo blue colors. In fact, these colors were actually brought when during the Leonardo da Vinci's time, when these particular colors are naturally available from the local plants, and that is how they became a part of the identity of the whole habitat. Now, not only that, certain prominent prominent personalities, how they become they create a landmark of a place. For instance, this was in Stratford-upon-Avon. When I was in London, I visited a Stratford-upon-Avon on Shakespeare's birthday, and I could see that even most of the people who actually follows the Shakespeare's plays and everything, and they do celebrate with certain rituals which happens every year. And some people come and play in the Shakespeare's house. What you can see here is this is Shakespeare's house, what you see here. This is Shakespeare's, where he lived. And so this kind of activities, these are some of the performatives which are performed in a particular place every year on the Shakespeare's birthday. So normally it creates certain activities, the old people who have read about Shakespeare, and that is how people, the younger generation who went there, who seen all these things, we come across these tales, these stories, which narrates from that generation to the younger generation. So even the performatives also can transfer the information. Now we further narrow down to the kind of differentiation of what is a sacred site and what is a sacred natural site. Here it gives the sacred site embraces areas of special spiritual significance to people and communities, right? And the term sacred natural site corresponds to the areas of land or water having special spiritual significance to people and communities. For instance, I'll say how we differ it from, sacred natural site is a larger one, and the sacred site could be a subset of that. In fact, if you look at the whole Ganges, the river Ganges, which is considered as a holy river, it is a natural site. Could be a whole river stretch is considered as a holy for the Hindu communities. And for instance, we in the Uttarakhand we have 5 prayags, and we have Dev Prayag, Karna Prayag, Vishnu Prayag, like that we have a few prayags. And the prayag means basically the junction of 2 rivers and how different rivers join. And there is an indigenous thinking about, because each of these, many of the Hindu pilgrim aspect, what they believe is they need to take a dip in all these kind of 5 prayags, and because that is where the junction of 2 or 3 rivers joining. And obviously the scientific or the ecological reason is because all these rivers are flowing from various mountains, hills, valleys, and carrying a lot of medical potentiality within it. And so obviously it was a kind of understanding that we need to, and gradually that becomes a kind of a sacred phenomena, and that is how they started constructing ghats here and temples. And then you see the whole setting becomes a kind of ritualistic spot, and that becomes a kind of attachment, as well as it is creating an identity. Similarly, in Badrinath, on the left hand side, what you see is in Badrinath, where people travel long distances for the Char Dham Yatra, and they do some ritualistic offerings to the dead people. If someone is dead and they do travel such long distances, and they do offer in this Kapalam, they call it as, and then where this is a place they say that it will directly go to them. And so the souls can actually, they can rest in peace. So here you can see all these kind of beliefs, I can say, the belief systems and the practices, how they're practicing, and this all becomes a kind of memory to us. Within, they're all building certain performatives, and it is adding meanings to that particular place. In fact, when you look at the even certain views to those mountains and certain landscapes, and even this is a temple called Adi Badri. This is under the ASI in ASI area, and then Archaeological Survey of India have actually just retrofitted, and they are maintaining it. I mean, in fact, many of the people know only the Badrinath, but there are also, ideally, the stories talk about 5 Badris. One is the Adi Badri, in which way they talk. It is also the first Badri, and then what we go here in Badrinath is the Vishal Badri, where there are different postures of God sitting there. Now, all these stories, how they are imagined, and what is the relationship between the imagined and the real landscapes, and how they actually come into a kind of place settings. In fact, it's very interesting part which Amita refers to some scholarly literature, the imagined landscape, where picture as a space is drawn from the real landscape, and space as a picture is in turn guides it, revealing the reciprocity between representation and the physical reality. I'll tell you an example. I think in this lecture what I will do is I will try to cover with an example of what Amita Sinha have covered in her work on the sacred landscape of the Braj Govardhan. And in Indian society, we have one of the famous gods, Rama and Krishna. And Krishna is a kind of another incarnation of Vishnu, where the Mahabharata war also taken place. But there are 2 phases which we normally discuss. One is the childhood of Krishna, where he spent, and the another one where the Mahabharata war in the Kurukshetra. So there are 2, and the childhood is so fanatic and so immersive by the way it is described, the way it is celebrated. I mean, I would say it is one of the ideal childhood one can actually celebrate. I will not say it is an enjoying, because in whole Krishna's philosophy, there is some of the experts or some of the theological people differ, like the difference between enjoyment and the celebration is like when you dance, when you see dance, you are enjoying the dance, but you actually dance, you are celebrating the dance. So here what you see is a story of when Krishna, he spent all his childhood in the Govardhan, and there was all these Govardhan, the whole landscape is actually referred also to the kind of Braj societies, which is mostly to do with the cattle and herding societies. Because of its kind of landscape, it offers such a potentiality, and the great rivers like Yamuna and all, they are all forming a part of the narratives of this kind of landscape. Now, the story what you see here is the Krishna, he actually talks about the story. He talks about how he protects the whole village by lifting a mountain on his thumbnail so that everyone takes a shelter of it. And in fact, this has become a kind of story and a narrative in the whole process. And this is one of the pilgrimage site, and people normally this whole site, people normally celebrate these with kind of making some kind of parikramas, which is a kind of circumambulations of going around these historic sites. They have a 7-day parikrama, they have a 30-day parikrama, which is a larger thing, and takes about 14 to 23 kilometers, and it takes about 5 to 6 hours. So there are two important imaginary elements which they actually forms, a setting of the imaginary landscape. So one is the Govardhan Hill itself, and it's the whole parikrama and the way it narrates each and every story of the little Krishna and how he celebrated and what kind of activities and what kind of relationships we have with the kind of Gopikas and the Yamuna river. So, in fact, they made the second part is a kind of Yamuna river, where much of his story is narrated there, including many ghats, many kunds, and including many temples and certain spots which he spent there. So there are a lot of stories infilled within that. And you can see some kind of kunds here and the natural water bodies. So in that way, each and every place has its own rich significance, and which are actually translated by the myths. Now, the places are they're better understood through a discursive systems that operate through a series of meanings. And sometimes they are endless series of political, social, and cultural. And this is how people have constructed and often interpreted as a series of stories in time continuum process. And that is why we call it as myths. Whether it happened or not, that we are not fully aware of it, but it is translated as a form of myths. Now, here we can say about the depiction of Rasa Leela. Now, some of the places which they talk about how the Krishna, this is a form of a dance which is celebrated by Krishna and his Gopikas, where the center part is by the Radha and Krishna, and the Gopikas are celebrating the dance. And there is another story from the Brooklyn Museum, we can find that where he actually dances on the hood of a snake. And then he rescues the villagers from all these serpents' attacks. And that is how these kind of stories have passed down. Even today, my kid learns about all this because we tell about it. So that is how these are narrations which passes through it. And that is all these myths and traditions, and they're actually placemaking process often emerge as a devices that dictate certain codes and norms which have tangible effects on space and place. Now, you can see until 19th century, these are all very much of a Hindu dominant thing, but then with a gradual influences of many Islamic influences, and also you can see the whole Vishram Ghat of Madura, or the whole river banks, the whole landscape of the setting, it actually composes in a kind of hybrid Hindu-Islamic style, and it actually reflects the regional design vocabulary, which is a kind of synthesis of Rajput and Mughal architecture. And you can see the Chatris, you can see some kind of pyres where people do certain activities. Certain activities are based on the gender. And that is what we call this kind of enacting the sacred landscape. Because enactments, these performatives, these narratives, these stories, they're all becomes an enactments that give meaning, and it builds a memory with the people living there and the people visiting there. And it holds the possibility of encounter with the divine presence. Now, Krishna is only a subject, but the whole stories, they're all objectified through this subject. And that is how it becomes a setting of that place. So, the landscape is seen, felt, tasted, and inscribed in the body through circumambulation. Someone walking for 14 kilometers, 23 kilometers, someone walking for 30 days. So it gives him much of strain, it gives him much of thinking, it gives him time for thinking, it gives him time for realizing the place. And dance performances and the floral art, the festivals and the kind of daily worships, all these gives certain identity, certain places. I mean, they all are giving certain meanings, and they are all telling the stories of this Lord Krishna and his life, and the some morals it is giving you. And they're all driven by faith, cultural beliefs, how they are transmitted from one generation to the next generation through oral traditions, storytelling, singing, dancing, dramatic performances. And they're all done through a collective and as well as the personal memories. And in the last part, which I would like to, so now we realize that yes, these kind of cultural landscapes, how they are rooted or enmeshed within the ecosystems of the river setting, and how the stories, how, but what is happening in the present conditions? I can just stop in this slide showing what are the various impacts for all these kind of sacred grooves, sacred kunds, or these sacred places. A small example from the Millennium Assessment of the Ecosystems, which they talk on the sources of loss of Indian sacred groves. One is a commercial forestry, because they're all destroyed under the commercial forestry schemes, and the development projects. Sometimes the water table has come down, and obviously certain lands were converted into revenue lands, and many sacred groves have lost because of railways, roadways. So that importance is missing. And shift in the belief system. In some cases, many communities have shifted their religion. Obviously certain practices have changed. And Sanskritization, like where the local folk deities, like as I said to you in the previous class, where people, the tribals pray for Narmada deity, and now they have some of the Sanskritization process have started. Similarly, the pilgrim and tourism activities have also disintegrated many grooves and all, and that is the more influx of pilgrim and tourists also is causing some impacts. And also removal of biomass. And obviously, in very critical, that encroachment do happens for in every pilgrim spot because of various economic reasons, various social reasons. And also the modernization and the market forces, and how they also become a threat to these kind of sacred places. And fragmentation and perforation. Now, because of any kind of road extensions or any kind of infrastructural projects, how they how they actually make particular perforations into certain species, and you can see such kind of fragmentation leads to loss of species and disruption of ecological functions. In fact, in many places in India, even the contours, how the natural water flow systems has been obstructed because of these kind of obstructions or some diversions, or so this is how a lot of impacts are happening. But when whoever is looking at this kind of historical environments or the sacred environments, one need to understand this kind of essence of mythological aspects and how it is embedded in the minds and the memories of the people and the communities. So we can't just ignore them. So there is a very great relationship between the nature and the culture. Okay, and thank you very much.